The sequel trilogy has came and went, and now we as Star Wars fans have a lot to talk about. And listen, guys, though I am very positive on The Rise of Skywalker and more positive on the sequel trilogy than some fans out there, I think the simple truth is all of us can probably acknowledge that we do deserve better as fans. So let's talk about the sequel trilogy. Let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. What's up, everybody? It's Josh. Welcome back to the channel, and happy Star Wars Sunday to you if you're watching this on Sunday. And if you're not, no big deal, but you should know we drop dope Star Wars videos every single Sunday. Now, I also want to put this out there right up front. This video is going to be very critical of the Disney sequel trilogy, but it's also going to be fair. You guys know how I do it. I like to be very fair. I don't think the sky is falling. I don't think Star Wars is dead, but I also think that most fans can agree that we do deserve better as fans when it comes to Star Wars movies, when it comes to Star Wars product. And so I felt like it was really a good opportunity to sort of look back, look at all the good things, the bad things, and the really ugly things that happened with Star Wars. And then maybe we can talk about it. You guys can comment here. We can do a live stream about it and just see what we think we want from Star Wars in the future. So let's actually start at the end of the trilogy, and that would be with the last film, The Rise of Skywalker. And, you know, it's no secret to anybody at this point, I really like that film. Probably one of the only people online that really likes the movie, speaks very positively about it. I know there's a handful of people that do, but most people crap on it. And here's the thing. The one thing I can acknowledge in that film that a lot of people have brought up is that it is painfully obvious that Disney did not have a through line or a plan for this trilogy. I mean, let's just talk about the Rey Palpatine thing, right? So there are some clues and some things that can hint at her possibly being a Palpatine, but there was definitely not enough done diegetically in the story throughout the three movies to feel like it was earned and to let people buy it. Particularly the way it was executed in this last film was very much just like, hey, she's a Palpatine. Right in your face. Let's move on. And frankly, if this had been more foreshadowed, I think a lot more people would have been on board with this, honestly. You know what I mean? And I also believe that if Palpatine himself had been sprinkled throughout more within the trilogy, literally his name spoken more in all of these films, then the arrival of Palpatine in the third movie would have been way less jarring, and I think way more people would have bought it. The bottom line is, they didn't know for sure they were doing that, and that's why it's not in the other film. Now, to me, there's a really interesting meta thing going on here where we're sort of watching Disney try to figure out Star Wars and how to make Star Wars throughout watching the films, but people don't go to watch Star Wars to watch the meta commentary of what Disney is doing, right? They go to YouTube for that, which is why you're here. But point being, there is some aspects of it that are kind of interesting and we can dissect lessons from it, but overall, it doesn't actually play like a trilogy. It's really disjointed. And so I think really what happened with Rise of Skywalker is you either just forgive that disjointedness and just try to enjoy the story for what it is, or you completely check out. There were probably people that went into Rise of Skywalker thinking, this movie's going to make it all make a lot more sense. This will magically bring everything together. It'll finish off the Skywalker saga in an epic way. And we'll look back at this and be like, dang, it really was a trilogy. And instead, even someone like myself who really likes the film, I can't say that. I can't sit here and honestly look you guys in the eyes and say, hey, this was a totally planned trilogy. This is exactly what we expect as a trilogy. And honestly, look, my opinion here, it's the worst of the trilogies. Again, I don't think the sky is falling, but it's definitely the worst of the trilogies. Even the prequels have a through line. They feel very familiar. You can see the story going in a certain place, and it contextually all makes sense. Like, for real, this has been something I've been talking with friends about. It's like, I feel like watching the Disney trilogy is like watching Disney try to make Star Wars rather than just watching Star Wars. Like, you are literally just watching them try to figure it out. It's like a person that can play an instrument but can't quite figure out how to play this certain type of music, right? They're just not nailing it, and you can tell that they're not comfortable here. They don't flow with the notes. Now, I certainly don't think everything is bad in the sequel trilogy, and I honestly think there's a lot of really good stuff that was in the sequel trilogy that I hope Lucasfilm can sort of take into the next trilogy. I mean, honestly, I thought the casting was great. I think they casted amazing for this trilogy. I really do. I think a lot of people, even that don't like Rise, when they see the way that cast works together in that film, we long for what it would have been like if they had been together in the second movie. I think the action is incredibly well executed, and I really like the lightsaber fights in this trilogy, even though they are sparse when compared to what we got in the prequels, because they're sort of a mix of the old school Star Wars with the prequel stuff. Some of the prequel fights get a little too acrobatic for me. They're a little too ridiculous, and these fights in the sequel trilogy were much more grounded while still being amazing. One of my favorite fights in the sequel trilogy is the one on Endor. That is an amazing fight, and they're leaping, they're using these crazy skills. Like, I don't know, there's just something about that fight that I really liked. So there's a lot of good stuff that they did, and I think they did nail visually, and in moments it totally feels like Star Wars, right? There's really great stuff. I think Adam Driver carries the trilogy, and also surprisingly Harrison Ford has been amazing in the trilogy. So there's plenty of good stuff that they can still take away moving forward. But I truly believe, and I don't think I'm alone in this, that Lucasfilm's cardinal sin here was the way they executed the trilogy specifically. They were keen on allowing different creative voices to tell this story, okay? And so they kind of decided to mirror what George had done with the original films, where he sort of retconned stuff, made up the story as he went along. And I totally understand them thinking that that would be okay, but it's not, and it's totally different than what George was doing for a couple of different reasons. Let me talk about the reasons why I think this approach that Disney took doesn't work for franchises, particularly Star Wars now 40 years later. Number one, even though it is true that, yes, George did make stuff up as he went along and he changed things and he retconned things, he still had a singular creative vision for what he wanted the story to be. So it's like one writer revising a draft, but it still feels like that one writer, right? That's what I would equate the original trilogy to, honestly, because even though you have these other creatives come in, it's still all being driven by this singular creative force. And even though that guy changes his mind a little bit, it still flows, and it has that kind of a thing. So if they had a George Lucas, which we all know they did, they had the literal George Lucas that could have helped them. But regardless, had they had someone with a singular vision, they could have still played a little bit of jazz, but had it feel more cohesive because it was coming from a singular creative vision. You also have to understand that there was not the expectations and the lore and the built-in fandom for Star Wars back then. Star Wars was literally creating itself, right? So Star Wars, Empire, Jedi, this is Star Wars being created, right? And sure, there might have been some people that saw Empire and felt like that wasn't really Star Wars, and they saw Jedi and they felt like it wasn't Star Wars, you know, with the Ewoks or whatever. But by and large, they didn't have those expectations for those characters. We were watching what happened with those characters, experiencing it, and this was it being created at the ground level. Disney does not only not have that luxury, but they have the opposite problem. They have the problem that there is 40 years of established lore, established characters, and great stories that have already come before, that not only will they be compared to, but if they don't follow closely enough, they will incur a rage. And so they have to constantly be mindful of that history, and they have to respect it with what they're doing, okay? Now, I actually believe that both J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson are both respecting George's vision and respecting Star Wars, at least in their own way, when they do their films. The problem is they just disagree with what that even means, right? So while you have somebody like J.J. who's feeling like making sort of a love story to Star Wars, and he's trying to sort of replicate it in a way and really honor it and really, you know, mirror it and do that kind of a thing. On the other side of that, you have Rian that wants to take people's expectations and twist them, and he wants to deconstruct, and he wants to do the things that Star Wars did to him, where the things that he felt Empire did for him as a viewer, and he takes that in his direction. So he's trying to be true to George in a different way than Abrams is, right? Abrams is trying to pay homage, you could say copy, right? Rian is trying to create new to pay homage to what George did, and he's trying to be bold like George was, but you could say disrespecting the lore, not mirroring it enough. It's almost like they needed to have those two guys do the Dragon Ball Z fusion dance, and then you might have had the perfect person for the job. And really, that's what you get with Rise. You get sort of this meta commentary between the two films, this discussion of what Star Wars even is. And that's why I do think the sequel trilogy will be looked at much more positively in the future, because it kind of is a meta commentary on what Star Wars even is. How can you actually make Star Wars? How do you honor Star Wars and do what's new? And these directors are having this conversation. The problem is, for normal viewers, and even myself who likes that kind of stuff, that's not what I'm looking for Star Wars, right? I want just Star Wars, good adventure. I want to live in that world. I want the fantasy, you know, the themes, good versus evil. it's not as deep as what these two gentlemen were trying to make it. It's like I said before in this video, and this is just my total encapsulation of what I think the sequel trilogy is it's really like watching Disney, watching JJ, and watching Ryan try to make Star Wars rather than watching Star Wars. That's what's been going on. But this is all, of course, in retrospect to the ending. Let's go back to the beginning. Let's talk about the very start of this whole thing, where a lot of these sins sort of originate from. The biggest sin at the start of Disney Star Wars was the fact that they had several different opportunities to put that singular creative voice in charge of the trilogy and to give that singular guiding strength to the narrative. And it's like undeniable. Disney has talked about this. Bob Iger has talked about this. Their first option was to use the treatments that George had. And here's the thing. I think if you read between the lines and what Bob Iger was saying in his book, it's not just that they could have used George's stories, but they could have come to George saying, hey, we like your stories, but we kind of want to do this, right? Instead, they kind of roll up and kind of spring it on him that they have this whole new thing and they're trying to get his input on that, and it just didn't work. Like, George was turned off and wanted nothing to do with it. And I think that had you sort of bridged that gap and maybe done the JJ stuff but allowed George to remain as a singular creative force, it would have helped out a lot. Now, the next option for this were the Michael Arndt scripts. Again, something talked about in Bob Iger's book. Literally, Michael Arndt, when hired to come on and do this, he literally told them, you need years. You need to literally write out this whole trilogy like it's a singular story, and that will take years to do right. And so you got to do this before you move to make these movies. Disney simply said no. They weren't interested in that. They just paid for Star Wars. They paid a ton of money. They needed to make some revenue ASAP. And so they literally fire Arndt. And then you see all these shots of JJ and Kasdan literally working on the script for The Force Awakens on the set. It's a miracle that that movie works at all, and it's honestly really good. I like that film a lot, but again, it's super clear that they screwed up by not having that singular vision. And the third and on options with this was to just get someone else to do it, to be that creative voice. They could have gotten JJ, and according to new reports, what happened was Kathy went to JJ during the incredibly rushed and crazy production of Episode 7, and she offered him the trilogy then. Again, that's so weird. Why not offer him the trilogy right out the gate? Why not get someone that's going to do this right out the gate for you? This is such a big deal. And the way that they approach it to get JJ on board for that is so weird. They just should have taken their time. And even if it's not JJ, there's plenty of creative people out there that would have taken this job. And even if JJ didn't want to direct, they could have totally got him to give notes on what he would have done with the trilogy and then kept other directors on that path. They could have done that, because I refuse to believe that J.J. Abrams created Episode 7 without ideas for what he wanted to do in 8 and 9. In fact, I think we see those ideas play out in The Rise of Skywalker. I think we literally see JJ's trilogy with a longer Act 1 than we needed, and then Act 2 and 3 smashed together in one movie. I think that's what Rise of Skywalker is. So that is literally where they went completely wrong. And this kind of leads me to a new thing that I want to talk about. It's a little conspiratorial, but I actually literally believe that the next biggest sin that they did was allowing Rian Johnson to make The Last Jedi the way that he made The Last Jedi. And I'm on record as being a person that likes that film. I do like that film. But here's the thing about that movie. It ruined everything, and I feel like crying when I watch it. Now, who knows if we'll ever find out the truth of this, but there are rumors that JJ had notes that he gave to Ryan, which Ryan completely threw out. And to be completely honest with you, even if that's not true, there's enough evidence to suggest that it was pretty clear that Ryan was taking things in a wild turn. JJ classically said when he read that script, he laughed. He laughed at the script, and some people thought, like, that was not a shot. I think it was a shot. And he also claims that after reading the script, he was praising Ryan for the boldness of that script. And if he respects the boldness of the script and the directions and things that Ryan did, it's super obvious that it was going way away from what he was going to do. That's what it is. If you're going out on a limb, if you're being bold in that sense of writing, you're doing something that was not the freaking plan. That's why it's bold. And because there's obviously no plan, Kathy just falls in love with this script, thinks it's incredibly fresh, which it is. Like, in a lot of ways, I can imagine being blown away by that script. And she was so taken by it that she thought they were creating the new empire or whatever. And she greenlights it, and they just go with it. They literally just go with this weird bend that's super different than what it came before, and it's also way more meta. So it kind of points back to their first problem, which was not having that plan, right? They didn't have that driving force, that vision. But even if they didn't have that vision, they didn't have to allow Ryan to make a film that's so wildly different than the film that had come before. Like, literally, my biggest problem with that movie is that it shouldn't be the second film in a trilogy. He does so many interesting things, and like Rose and Paige would be totally interesting characters if that's the first movie in a trilogy, because then you're like, okay, here we go, let's go with them. But instead, it just feels off. It's like, who are these people? Why should I care? I just watched this other episode. I want to know what's up with these people. And their arcs all sort of regress in that film, which is just Ryan making a whole nother number one in the trilogy. He's making the first film in the trilogy all over again. That's what it feels like. And I'm not alone in this thinking. So the second biggest sin is, even though they abandoned the plan, they didn't have to go absolutely nuts and allow that dude to make that movie. And this kind of brings me to the third biggest sin, and this would be the connective tissue created by the ancillary material, which of course all goes back to the original sin, which was no plan. When Disney bought Star Wars, they rebranded and literally eliminated all of the stuff that was in the expanded universe and called it Legends. And they did that predicated on the idea that they were creating a new canon, and everything you bought in the new canon was going to matter. It was all going to tie together, and this was a whole new thing for fans and lore junkies and people that just love knowing everything about Star Wars to jump in. It was perfect for new fans. It was perfect for old fans that wanted a refresh. It was a good idea. And it's super obvious that the reason this was done was for money. Okay, nobody can deny that. It's obviously for money. The new value of the things people were going to purchase were really going to matter because they were all going to tie together. Okay, but it's not crazy for companies to want to make money, but there has to be an equivalent value exchange. When I give my hard-earned money to a company and I buy stuff, I'm doing it not just because of the stuff, but because of the experiences and the feelings that the stuff gives me back as a fan. Now, to be fair, there are a lot of things within the ancillary material that actually do tie together. There's a lot of great stuff. The shows, books, and comics all seem to really tie together very nicely, but it stops right at the films. Like right at the movies, which are the biggest, most important tentpole pieces of media for new Star Wars. All of that other stuff just drops off. And the thing is, I can only imagine that this is partially because films are just hard to make, but also because they're so focused on just making their films. These filmmakers and these actors and the producers do not care about this other stuff. They literally let it all fall by the wayside. I mean, there's classic examples proving this. When the guy that plays Hux was asked about how his father was killed by his character with the help of Phasma and how ruthless he is, and he's like, I had no idea. That would have been really nice to know. That's on the production. That's on the production. And so it's just whack to me that with a complete lack of plan, they just go about making these movies in crazy ways. And they're like, okay, but we'll do this, but it's way too hard to then go in and tie in all of these ancillary things, which is, at the end of the day, why they stayed so far away from the post-Return of the Jedi era. Like, everybody wants to know what happened post-Return of the Jedi, and Lucasfilm was purposely quiet about it because they didn't have a plan, and they didn't want to do anything that would eventually need to be retconned super hard or changed, and they didn't want that to happen. So they go back and start tying in stuff after Empire. It's like, or, you know, even before Empire. It's like so weird to me, this kind of a strategy. Let me name just a few things that are set up completely different in the books and comics than they are carried over into the films. Number one, Grand Admiral Holdo. Grand Almaholdo is a cool character in the Princess Leia novel. She's awesome, but she's also really eccentric. She's a lot more like Luna Lovegood. She's kind of floaty. She's kind of ditzy. And even though she's, really good at what she does and she's eccentric, she's not this cold, calculated, secret-keeping person that's always scowling. That's not the character. Captain Phasma, totally a badass, ruthless, a survivor, calculating, cruel, wicked, awesome, total badass, right? We get this novel with her, which is incredible, and then she's just weak sauce, a joke, a laughing stock in the films, barely has any screen time, doesn't really do anything cool. General Hux, brilliant, brutal, ruthless, cunning, a serious threat to Kylo. Kylo knows he's a threat to him because he knows that he had his own father killed, that he's raised in the ranks. Phasma and him are tight. It's a power struggle between Kylo Ren and General Hux. For real. Then they turn him in to Daffy Duck. And finally, Finn. Finn, who is incredibly badass in the books, man. Finn is a super gifted stormtrooper. There were books talking about his training, how Phasma knew he was one of her most gifted cadets, how he was literally constantly saving other people within his own battalion. And Six, the guy that puts the blood on him in The Force Awakens, that was his homeboy, who he had literally carried through drills and kept safe in the army, and then he just gets killed in there. You know what I mean? Finn got turned totally soft and ridiculous in the second, or the first really, but especially the second movie. Now he sort of returns to form, and I love what they did with his Jedi abilities in Rise, but it's like too late, man. Like they really kind of ruined the character. And frankly, in a more general sense, there was just not a lot of connective tissue for this trilogy. There wasn't a lot of stuff that was tying it all together. Clone Wars, the show, came out after Attack of the Clones, the movie, and it does a lot to fill us in on the character of Anakin. It does a lot to make us understand the relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin. And we get none of that kind of stuff in the new Disney era because they clearly didn't have a plan and they weren't confident enough to actually be spinning out the stories properly from the ideas that they had. Now, let me be clear. I'm not saying it was a complete failure, and I don't think they need to reboot the canon or anything like that, but it's just a simple point that it could have been executed so much better. And I think a lot of the numbers went down and the disinterest from hardcore fans happened when they realized that this stuff wasn't tying together, that it really didn't matter that you read the book beforehand because the character was just going to be changed on the screen. And again, this all goes back to the original sin of not having that singular creative vision. And by the way, I don't think the singular creative vision needs to come from one person. It can come from a group of people, but they need to decide on what it is, and then it's from there a singular creative vision. So overall, that's where I'm at with the sequel trilogy, kind of the good and the bad and the more ugly parts of it. I also think you have to talk about the PR for Disney, because the PR, especially after The Last Jedi, was atrocious. And here's the thing. A lot of people get online and they say stuff like, well, Disney said this, or Disney disrespected the fans, Disney did this. A lot of that is actually not Disney, right? It's not like Disney did a press statement and came out and said, like, if you didn't like Rey, you're a man baby. That's not it. But what you have is sort of thought leaders within Disney and people that work at Disney, and the perception becomes that they speak for Disney. So when Ryan comes out and says something, or Kathy comes out and says something, or, Mark Hamill comes out and says something, Pablo Hidalgo, on down the list, any thought leader over at Disney says something, and then it gets picked up by the media, then it spins its own narrative. And the thing with the PR for Disney is that they didn't do anything to try to quell that. There was some stuff in the lead up to Rise where you would hear some answers given by Bob Iger talking about how we love the fans, they're very passionate, we get it, they care. Kathy saying, hey, we think we're co-authors with the fans, we get it, they care, we care about them. That kind of stuff came in way too late, and there was never anything that Disney did. Disney, you have a microphone. You've got a massive microphone and platform. You can talk to the press. You can do interviews. You can explain things. You can reprimand people. You can make statements. It just blows my mind that they just allowed people to just take the narrative and make it into what they wanted. Kathy didn't say anything. The first time Kathy spoke publicly after Last Jedi, I believe, was at Celebration. Literally, I believe that. And it's just crazy to me, like, how are you not controlling the narrative more. So, of course, that is a horrible sin. But ultimately, had they had a singular plan, I think that they would have kind of been adverse to a lot of the criticisms and really the failings of what they did. Now, let's give credit where credit is due, right? They seem to have learned this lesson, and what they're doing with Luminous and in the High Republic era does appear to be solving that problem. And I really hope that they have this singular creative vision, right? That they go in with this vision, and they also have more of a roadmap so that the ancillary materials really do all tie together. I'm hoping that's what they're doing with Project Luminous. That's what they're doing with the High Republic era in the 2022 film, because as I said many times in this video, there's a lot of great stuff that was done in these films. You don't need to start over, and you've made billions of dollars. Like, the brand is okay, even though it's on a decline. And so you can get that oomph back. You can reestablish the value of the things that you had done before and that you had promised fans. And I think you just need to be more open. Explain that you didn't do everything perfectly. Explain that you're taking steps to do things better. You need to really get out there and try to control the narrative more yourself and not just allow the narrative to be created out there online. My overall score for the sequel trilogy is a C+. There are great moments within this trilogy. I really enjoy all of the films for different reasons and in different parts of them, but overall, as a cohesive trilogy, not a win. It didn't really do it. And overall, this first phase of Disney Star Wars didn't land perfectly, and there's a lot of lessons that I think Disney can learn from this. But those are my thoughts. I want to know your thoughts. Let us know in the comment section below, and who knows, maybe somebody at Disney will be looking at this video, so please feel free to be very specific and very constructive down in the comment section. And who knows, maybe we'll do a live stream about this soon where we can all kind of talk about this together. And now let's shout out Vastian Creed. Indeed, it was Jedi Master Jace Malcolm who was defeated in the opening cinematic for the Old Republic. So shout out to you, Vastian Creed. And now let's ask another nerd card question before we get out of here. Where do the names for the battalions of Sith troopers come from in The Rise of Skywalker? Answer that question in the comment section below. As I always say, hope you're having an awesome and a nerdy day, and I'll see you in the next video.